Hey everyone, my name's Carly.
My name is Brooke. Our goal today is to interview authors and get information to help other authors get published and to be successful. Today we're interviewing Courtney Walsh. She is a New York Times bestselling author of small town romances such as A Match Made at Christmas and Just One Kiss.
So Courtney, tell us a little bit about your new book.
Well, my latest book is called A Match Made at Christmas. It's a Christmas novella. It's actually the first Christmas novella I've ever written. And I wrote it in the quarantine because I really, really, really needed something to occupy my brain. And I really wanted something that was just light and fun. And when people read it, they just kind of are whisked away. So it's connected to one of my other books called If for Any Reason, which is set in Nantucket. It's totally a standalone, but it just features one of the secondary characters that's in that book. So I was like a friends to more story, which is like my favorite trope of all of the romance tropes that there are. I think that's my favorite one. And it was just honestly, it was like mental sanity for me to write it. So it's been really fun, and I love Christmas. So it's been really fun to have something to put out, and it feels a little bit like like a gift. I just want everybody to read it and escape the world for a little
while. Now. Yeah.
That was basically the reason that I wrote it. So
we all need a happy ending right now.
Yes, I am all about the happy ending. I'm all about not having anything too heavy and not having anything that's going to be tragic. I just want things that are really, light and fun, and of course I love romance.
So we are going to move forward and go ahead and start asking our questions that you guys left in the comments. Our first one comes from Joel Thomas Feldman. Sorry if I pronounced any of that wrong. And he was wanting to know, how do you maintain a balance in marketing / social media presence and writing?
Well, I think this is honestly one of the most difficult things that writers face. Most of the writers I know would much rather just write and not market themselves. I mean, most people, I think, struggle to say, hey, look at me, look at this thing that I did. And I think you battle that for a long time, especially when you first start writing, because you just feel kind of silly putting it out there and putting yourself out there. There's a UPS guy walking by, sorry, got distracted. But I do think it's important. And I mean, I think there's a theory that when you get a writing contract, especially like with a traditional publisher, that they're going to handle everything for you. And I think they definitely handle some of the things. But I think more often than not, most writers nowadays, most authors are expected to handle some of the marketing. So you really do have to sort of carve out time for that. Now, some of the best advice I've ever gotten is don't try to do everything. Like you can't have the same presence on Facebook and Twitter and Snapchat and TikTok and Instagram. I mean, you kind of have to pick the things that work for you, that you like. For me, that's mostly Instagram, but also Facebook. But Instagram is a place where I don't feel like I'm working. I feel like that's a place where I can connect with people more authentically than other social media. And I think I get that a little bit in Facebook too. But I definitely don't think if I was trying to do all of the things that I would be successful at any of them. Okay. So it's just kind of about picking the things that work for you. And marketing, I think, is one of those things that's a huge struggle because it changes so often. So like as soon as you think you've got something figured out, everything changes. And so I think you just have to do what you can do. And I remember when I first released my very first book, I got so sick. I mean, physically ill, because I was so stressed out about that. And I think that things you gotta just be able to say, I'm going to do what I can do, but you cannot kill yourself. And then you kind of have to let it go, because a lot of it is going to be out of your control. A lot of it is going to be word of mouth. It's going to be, people sharing your book just kind of organically. That's the very best way. That's the best kind of marketing. And there really is only so much you can do. So I think the best marketing is, first of all, write the very best book that you can, and then do what you're able to do and let some of the rest of it go. So, but it is a very delicate balance. I think it's one of probably the biggest struggle that most writers have.
We're all introverts. Most writers, at least, are introverts, right? Like, that's right.
Yeah, like writing comes so much more easy. Like if I could write you something, but like when you were talking about getting out there and promoting, and I mean, speaking, like if you're writing nonfiction, I mean, those people are speaking and like doing guest posts and interviews and all of that stuff. I mean, that's not easy for a lot of people. So it's definitely a challenge. I think you have to decide what you're willing to do and what you're able to do well. You know, that's the other thing is you want to, and I mean, you can definitely get better the more that you do it, but it's a ton of work. It's hard. I will say one of the things that I don't think people realize about writing is it's a hard business. You know, it's hard to get into, you know, but also worth it. So
yeah, it definitely is. So we'll move on to the next question from DJ Harrington Writer. How long did it take you to take from your first draft to publication?
You know, I saw this question. You guys sent this to me, and I honestly don't remember. I signed with my first agent in 2008, and my very first novel was released in early 2012. Okay. But I wasn't writing that whole time. I wasn't writing. I actually had a different novel that we shopped around first, and then I got this contract. But I think I got the contract in like 2010. So, I mean, I think normally the whole process now is about a year for traditionally published books. You know, you turn in your rough draft, you get edits back, you work on your edits, you get a copy edit back. You know, there's a lot of stuff that goes into it. So that whole process is typically about a year long. If you're writing indie, you can release more quickly, and it's just going to kind of depend. I can usually write a rough draft in about, like, I would call that like my fast draft in about 3 months. But that's not something I would ever let anyone read because, you know, like once you get it done, you're sort of like, okay, it's very rough. We need to go back and like fix everything. But yeah, I mean, it's not a quick thing. It's not a quick process, you know, but a lot of people, it just kind of depends. A lot of people can write more quickly, and a lot of people need that full year to write a manuscript, or some people even longer.
Yeah. I have found that I definitely need over a year and a half.
Yeah.
I'm a quick writer, but I'm also new. So I'm like, you're still
learning as you're going. And well, it's funny too, because like my husband is a huge fan of Pixar. I mean, we're both really big fans of Pixar. I mean, talk about creativity. And one of the things, he read this quote, and one of the creators there said, the movie's never done, it's just released. And I feel that way with a book. It's like I just recently reread, I'm getting ready to re-release a book that I published in 2016. And even reading it now, I'm like, oh, I'm going to fix this, or, oh, I'm going to change this. I'm going to take this out. I mean, it's never done. It's just out, you know, you get to that deadline and you're like, it's out in the world, you know, but you can always tweak it. So yeah, there's always more to do.
I had a period in my life where I wanted to be a photographer, and I got really frustrated that every time I took a picture and it was blurry, I couldn't fix it.
Yeah.
But as a writer, you can go back and you can make changes all you want.
Yeah. Yeah. You can drive yourself nuts doing that too, but
I have done that before.
It's like, yeah, you're just pulling yourself at the end of it. I've done that.
Yeah, for sure. At some point you have to just say, okay, I'm done.
Mm-hmm.
I'm gonna move to the next thing. Yeah.
Yep.
For sure.
For sure.
Perfect. All right. So this next one comes from SC Jensen .author, and they want to know what's your best time of day for writing?
Morning. Definitely in the morning. I used to be more of a night owl, but then I think when my kids got into school, my whole like, what's it called? Like my whole internal schedule changed. So I write when my kids are gone, when they're at school, which I mean, obviously this year has been a little iffy, but when they're occupied and at school, like from 7:30, 8 in the morning until like 2:30, that's the time that I try to get my whole work day in. So then in the late afternoon and evening when they're home, I'm not holed up by myself. If I've got a really big, tight deadline, sometimes I have to do that, but I try to keep my weekends free. I learned that the hard way. I used to just write work all the time, and that's a really great way to run yourself into the ground. I think every creative person needs time to rest and fill your tank back up. And if you're just constantly like, you know, having these really long writing days and then not taking time off on the weekend, you're just going to burn out. So I try to be really protective of that time. But so I've learned to be more productive in the morning and the early afternoon.
Do you have like a word count or some kind of a goal that you try to hit?
Yeah. So if I know I have a book due, say, I know my books are usually around like 95,000 words. And if I know my deadline is, so say my next deadline is December 15th. So months ago, I took like 95,000 words and I divided it into the time that I had left. So I would know how many words I had to write every week.
Okay.
And then I can break it down by the day. So if I want to write 4,000 words a day, maybe I only have to work 2 or 3 days a week. But if I want to write 2,000 words a day and write 5 days a week, so I just kind of make my own schedule that way. Yeah. And that's been really helpful because then you can close your computer when you hit that word count if you want to, and you can walk away from it and you don't feel like, because I struggle with that. I struggle with feeling like I could be doing more, I could be writing, I could be working. But if you have to have other things in your life. And like I said, I learned that the hard way. So that has been really freeing for me to just go, okay, I'm going to write 2,000 words today. And once I do that, I can go do something else.
When you hit that word count, the rest of the day, do you feel like you're still kind of like in your writer's head, like you're still thinking about characters or scene, like the scene that you wrote? So I'm like, do you have a trick of how to turn that off? Because sometimes I'm like, yeah, I'm done writing, but I'm like, there's still. I'm not
kidding. I think as writers, like you are always thinking about your story. And I mean, you'll be in line at like a fast food restaurant ordering and you're like forming sentences in your head. And I mean, I think that's when you just know you're a writer, but it is really hard because if you're in the middle of a point where, and I'll also say if I hit 2,000 words and I'm like cranking and it's like, I'm like in it, sometimes I'll just keep writing. If I have nothing else to do, I'll just keep writing. But sometimes when I'm stuck, then I'm like thinking about it, and I can get in a really bad mood, and like I'm not fun to be around. I feel so bad for my husband and my kids because sometimes I'm just sort of like, I don't know, and he'll be like, what's the matter? I'm like, can't figure out the story, can't figure out this piece, and he's like, you'll figure it out, you always do. I'm like, that's not helpful. It doesn't help me. So I really don't know how to turn it off. I mean, it's just always in the back of your head. I don't know.
Costa that gets the job, but I'm not
saying. I know. You're always talking to like imaginary people.
Uh-huh. Mm-hmm. So my husband came the other day, he's like, are you just sitting in here in silence? I'm like, it is not silent up here. And I pull out my phone, like, these are all just the notes that I've had. I'm like, oh, I need to go back and rework that like chapter, or this motive needs to be more like stated at the end. So like, yeah, you understand why my character's doing something. But yeah, it's always.
It's always in your head. Sometimes it's out loud, and that's even worse when someone walks in and you're just like, who are you talking to? And it's like, myself.
Imaginary friends.
Yeah.
My brother-in-law took the most embarrassing photo of me just like staring off into space. Like
there's a lot going on in there.
I mean, I do it all the time.
Yeah.
It's embarrassing. Okay, let's move on to the next one. We have a question from Emily Vanderbent, author. Best books on crafting story.
Okay, so I think some books that I've really, really liked. The Moral Premise is a good one. I just bought one called Save the Cat. It was recommended to me. I haven't read it, but I've heard like a lot of people talk about it. Stephen King wrote On Writing. I think people talk about that one all the time because he's just, I will say, that's not my genre. Small town romance and horror don't exactly mix, but he's such a good storyteller. So learning from that. But I will say some of the best writing craft advice I've gotten has been going to conferences, sitting in on classes. I like to learn that way. I learn in a more academic setting. I like to take notes, not on a computer, but with my actual pen. I think it gets in my head better. The only thing I don't love is when they put you on the spot and they're like, here's a story prompt and then go, and then they want you to share it out loud. I'm always, no, that's not how I work. But I love to sit and just absorb that sort of thing. So I think if you can take a class, that's also really helpful. Masterclass has so many
do all that.
Have you done them?
Yes, James
okay.
Patterson's on there.
I definitely want to do some of these. Aaron Sorkin has one.
I watched all of Aaron Sorkin's. His was probably my favorite.
Yeah,
because he actually does like a writing room. So you're in like the video, you're in the writer's room, and it's like exactly how they actually come up with it, like a writer's board.
That's like fascinating. There's quite a few writing ones on there. So, I mean, if you learn that way, if you prefer to learn with a book, I mean, I don't think there's nothing wrong. There's a ton of them. But yeah, I think those are some of my favorites.
I think too, like the writers being introverts, I was so against going to conferences until I actually went to one. It was Quills in Utah. You've been to Quills, haven't you, Brooke? Did you go to the Quills conference? I loved it. That was like, learned so much from that. So yeah, if you haven't done any conferences, just go to one and see if you like it.
And I think too, like, even though you're an introvert, everybody else there is pretty much introverted. You're going to get your handful of people who are really comfortable talking with other people, but there's something about being in a room with people who get what you do. I mean, I don't know about you guys, but I don't have a lot of people in my real life who are writers. I'm surrounded by a lot of creative people, but when you're a writer and you can talk about writing with people, that's inspiring. I mean, there's nothing like that. So, I mean, that's why I think going to a writer's conference is it is just good, like filling up your tank, good
energy. It's like everyone's there, like we all want the same thing, like we all want to like help one another and learn, and like we all are eager.
For sure.
Yeah, you leave just so excited.
Yeah. One other book that I would highly recommend, I forgot about this, but when I was first starting, it's called The Artist's Way by Julia Cameron. And it's kind of like part book, part workbook, but it is like what we're saying, like just so inspiring for any creative, like whether you're a writer, an artist, or a photographer, or any kind of creativity at all. It's a great resource. It's a kind of, I've been through it twice. It's like one of those things where it's been so long, I'm like, I should do that again, because it is really good.
So our next question is Elizabeth's poet. It's Elizabeth_poetry_music. And she wants to know, when are you most inspired to write? Guessing in the mornings?
Yeah, I think in the mornings, but I think that's more out of necessity. I think when I'm most inspired is when I have an idea that's new. I think that like there's different phases of the process. And when you're first like creating the story and you first get just an inkling of like, sometimes I'll just get the first line of a book, and then it's just like, it can start you off on this great, I don't know, gallop, as opposed to plodding through and trying, like when you get stuck and you're just like, I'm writing stuff that I'm going to have to change later. But when you're like really, really excited about something new, that's probably the biggest inspiration I think that I have. Yeah.
For sure. Yeah, I've always felt that like after reading like books on writing, if I feel stuck, like I'll read a book on writing, and then I'll read that idea, and then I'll get so excited about it, and then I'll just like leave my writing book and start writing instead.
Yeah, which is such a good feeling. You have to take advantage of that, because it doesn't come along, it's not one of those things that just always there.
No.
So when it's there, it's like, those are the days when I'm like, I know I hit my word count, but I'm gonna go because I'm really into it right now.
Just flowing through. Yeah, there's times where Danny, my husband, and he's like, oh, like, am I gonna see you tonight? And I'm like, hey, I'm sorry, like, luckily he's so
on your own.
Yeah, I know. But I'm like, yeah, no, this does not come very often, so take advantage of it when it's here.
Rare.
I'm busy. Okay, so we have another question from Amber Faroukwi. How do you overcome writer's block?
Okay, so when I was first starting out, I heard this quote, and it was, don't get it right, get it written. And I think that takes a lot of the pressure off. Like when you're blocked and you're stuck, I have two pieces of advice. Number one, release that pressure to make it perfect, because a first draft is never perfect. I think when I started writing, I was so dreading the rewriting process and the editing process that I was like, I have to make this perfect. And now that I've written several books, I realize there's no such thing. I mean, that's not possible. So it releases a lot of the pressure to be able to write something. So sometimes it's a matter of just like pushing through, going to the next thing. Like if you're stuck and you're like, I don't know what happens next, you can go to the next thing that you do know, and you can write that. The other thing I will say, and this has been my saving grace, sometimes you just have to get up and walk away. You have to go clean a toilet, or, you know, take the garbage out, or take your dog for a walk, or whatever. And I'm not kidding. When you like turn your brain off and you stop trying to force it, that's when you start to feel the idea come through. And that, I don't know why, it happens every time. I think there's something about disconnecting and, you know, letting your brain sort of rest a little bit, where then it's like, oh wait, I know what happens next, you know? So those would be my two pieces of advice. If you really like, you're on a deadline and you need to get words in, go to the next thing you know that's going to happen. Leave yourself a little note that says something happens here, go to the next thing you know that happens and write, or get up and walk away from it and do something totally meaningless where your brain doesn't have to be engaged. You know, wrap Christmas presents, or, you know, vacuum your living room or something. I mean, there's something about that freedom in your mind that loosens things up. I think it's kind of weird. I don't know what the connection is. I'm sure there's some psychological reason, but
I think that too, like just like walking, because you're using like the right left side of the brain, so like it just gets things flowing more up there and allows like those ideas to come to you.
Yeah, it does. It just opens things up a little bit.
Makes sense.
Cool. She also wants to know what the hardest part of writing a book is.
Well, marketing is definitely hard. For me, I think that's probably the hardest part, is getting it out there, finding the right audience for the book. But for the actual writing process, I think my hardest part is the first edit. Like that, you know, like you'll get feedback back from your editor, and then it's like taking that all in and then keeping all the details straight as you go through and work that feedback into your manuscript. I find that to be very daunting. It's never as bad as I think it's going to be, but I think it's one of those things that I build up in my brain where I'm like, this is going to be so hard. I don't know how I'm going to keep everything straight. And then once I'm done with it, I'm like, oh, that wasn't that bad. But it's just that initial reading that thing where you're like, oh, it wasn't perfect. Shoot. You know, but it always makes it better. So I value that, but at the same time, I find it to be a tiny bit overwhelming.
Yeah, you can see that for sure. I think the first draft is like, it's just that first, is that like kind of like, so do you use like an outline when you do your first draft?
I typically use a loose outline.
Okay.
This book that I'm getting ready to turn in next week, it's the first time I've ever plotted the book out. And I don't know why. I have no idea why. I don't know if it was just 2020 changed everything in my brain, but I will tell you, it went so much more quickly. Then like figuring it all out on the front end made everything go so much smoother. Normally I'm more of a seat of my pants writer, but I'll always have kind of a loose idea of where I'm going. Okay. I do a ton of character work on the front end. That's the main thing. I want to know who these people are, why they do the things that they do. But the plot, like what they're actually doing in the present day, is always harder for me to come up with, because I think I'm more of a character driven writer. So typically I will have kind of a loose outline, and then I know the main points that I have to hit, and I know generally where I'm going. But yeah, this last time writing, like, I mean, I had like details of every chapter, and I was like, why haven't I been doing this all along? I just don't think that way. So if you can do that, I recommend it. If you can't, I relate. It's hard.
So with you, so then you necessarily, do you like have your characters kind of tell you basically what's coming next in the plot? So you're not like plotting it all out. You like kind of listen to what their motives are, their goals are, what they're struggling with, and let them.
And you know, it's weird. This is kind of a weird thing to say, but when you're like in the middle of like, say you're writing a scene, my favorite thing to write is dialogue. So say you're in the middle of writing a scene, and like, you're just kind of like imagining out this scenario, and then one of your characters says something, and you're like, well, wait a minute. That's not the way that I thought it was going to go, but I'm going to see where that goes. And you just kind of play it out. And sometimes it works and sometimes it doesn't. Sometimes it takes you in a different direction. And sometimes you're like, yeah, no, I got to delete all of that. I'm going to go back. But I try to keep my dialogue the really realistic, like how would people actually talk? How would this conversation actually go? If somebody said that to me, how would I respond to it? Or if somebody said that to this character, because they're not all like me, how would they respond to it? And I think that can take you off. And I think that's where the fun comes in, which is why I don't like to plot everything out. Because I like to be surprised along the way and then discover stuff along the way. That tends to be really fun.
I like that's how you surprise your readers too. Like if you're surprised, like, oh, I didn't realize that they were going to say this or do this. And
yeah. It was so funny. I was reading this interview, or I think it was on, do you guys ever read Leanne Moriarty? She wrote Big Little Lies and What Alice Forgot. And she's one of my favorite authors. And she had this thing on her website, and she was like, if you're writing to tell me that my characters swear too much, I know. I've tried talking to them about this, but they don't listen. And I just thought that was so funny, because I'm like, I understand that. Like, there's just certain characters, they just sort of show up, and you're like, I don't know, I can't explain it. This is just how they are.
Like come through. It's like, yeah, you can't control them.
Exactly. It's like, I can't harness that. I can't.
No.
My characters don't swear, but I thought it was funny because hers do. And I mean, you get it. Like when you're reading it, you're just sort of like,
there's some things you really, you can't force someone to do. It's like, it's just not their character. They're not, doesn't flow.
It's funny. Yeah.
Yeah, that actually goes into like one of the next question I think that we had from Tammy, which is how well do you know your main character before you start? So you kind of
Yeah, I mean, a lot, as well as you possibly can. Now, I will say by the end, I know them better. So like when you start out, I try to do as much character work as I can. I actually was the theater major in college, and I learned how to create a character as an actor, which is so similar to creating a character as a writer. But I think in some ways, I think that's great. In 2020, it hasn't been so great, because I think I can take on everybody else's emotion and feeling, and that's not been great for me. But like as a writer, to be able to go into a character and get to know them, I think is really, really critical. There's a lot of different resources for like finding out what your character is afraid of, finding out what happened to your character that makes them, the person that they are. That informs every decision that your character makes, and it makes them, how they respond in different situations. You know that because well, this thing happened, so they don't trust anybody. So if this person breaks their trust, they're going to respond a different way than somebody who's never had that, wound in their backstory. So I think knowing your characters as much as you possibly can is huge at the start of a story. I think that's critical, but I also think that's why when you get to the end of the story, you're going to discover more things about them. That's why it's really critical to go back to the beginning and then keep layering in details about your character. So that's why it feels like such a long process, because you like use that first draft to really, really get to know them. And then you use your next time through to layer in all the things that you learned about them along the way. And then the third, fourth, fifth, sixth time to keep fixing and tweaking and make sure that there's no typos, that sort of thing.
Are you a fan of character sheets?
Yeah.
Years.
Yeah, like with all the questions and everything. Yes. And I have been since college. I mean, that was one of the things that we did when we would be in a play. And there's such value in that, because, I think if this year has taught us anything, it's like, not everybody thinks the way you do, and not everybody has your same story. And if you really want to be good at telling a story that's from a different point of view, you have to be able to immerse yourself in that person's personality. And I think that's a skill that, as authors, well, and as actors, that you want to hone and craft as much as you possibly can. And that's where the fun is. I think that's the most fun thing, is like being able to get into the head of somebody who's just completely not like you. And I mean, if you're writing the male point of view, like I always write the male point of view. That is one of my biggest pet peeves, is when a guy says something and I'm like, a guy would never say that. So I'm like running stuff by my husband and I'm like, you guys are pretty basic. I mean, the things you guys think, I mean, you're not overthinking. A woman has all the tabs open and a guy's like got three things. I know I'm oversimplifying and totally making this stereotypical, but it's just a funny conversation because men and women don't think the same. So yeah, that's a challenge, but it's fun.
So we have a question from Beyond the Matt Yogi, who said, I'd love wisdom about how to stop the analysis paralysis portion of pre-writing flow and how to move into writing more. I feel like you address that with writer's block.
Yeah, don't get it right, get it written. And one of the other things that I will say is get your butt in the chair. I mean, I'm a huge overthinker, so I think that can be a really to your detriment as a writer. I think you have to get into a place where you just go, it's not going to be perfect, and I can always fix it. Like what you said, it's not like a photo that turns out blurry. You can always go back and fix along the way.
Yeah, for sure.
Which is freeing.
So our next question, I'm going to definitely probably say the name wrong, but official Niha Tikwani. And they want to know what's tough to show, a good character turning bad or a bad character turning worse, knowing that being good isn't an option.
You know, it's tricky because with what I write, I struggled a lot because I don't usually have like an antagonist. I'm not writing fantasy or adventure like you would with that. I think what I would say about writing your villain, I think it would be hard to start out with a character that was bad and then, make them good, especially if you were wanting your reader to like them. But I think you have to, this is one thing that I actually learned this in acting. Your villain never thinks they're a villain. The villain of the story is the hero of their own story. So the villain has completely good motivation and feels justified in their choices. And I think if they don't, that's when they become kind of a caricature. So you want that villain. I struggle with villains. Like in movies, I always struggle because I'm like, I don't believe this. Like, okay, so Thor, my husband's a huge Marvel fan. My boys are big Marvel fans. Actually, my daughter is too. But Thor is my least favorite one because I cannot stand Loki. And I know this is probably a really bad, horrible, unpopular opinion, but I'm always like, I don't believe him. I don't believe it. I don't believe it. It's just kind of like, I don't know. It feels so trite. His motivation is so trite. Oh, poor you, you're not the king. I mean, that's how I feel. But I think when you're writing a character that has that in them, you just want to make it as realistic as possible. And I mean, if they can have big emotion, but it just has to be justified because that villain does not feel like Loki doesn't feel like the villain. He feels justified in that. So I'm not sure if that answered that question, but
I think so.
I think that's a really perfect response. Like they have to have a reason behind what they do.
Yeah.
And they feel like it's justified.
Yeah.
Nobody thinks that they're a terrible person.
No, I mean, if you get into an argument with somebody, you will fight like, well, but see my point, see, this is my side. Look at my side. I mean, I think it's the same thing with every character. Yeah. We all feel like, I think where the conflict comes in is that someone else has a perfectly justified reason as well. So yeah.
Yeah, and I think in your books, like an antagonist isn't always a person. Sometimes it's a storm. Sometimes it's a life event.
Right.
It's like Romeo and Juliet. The two families don't want them to be together. Like there's.
Right.
It's not always one person.
Yeah.
Right. Right.
So let's see. What's your advice for an author who just finished writing their first novel? So they finished writing. Like, what do they do now?
So if you just finished writing, my best advice would be put it away for a couple weeks. I think when you have been, like we were talking about, you obsessively think about this thing for this story, these characters, this world for, however many months it took you to write it. I think for me personally, I get too close to it. And then when I'm trying to edit it or I'm trying to read it, I don't have a good handle. I just feel like I need to get away from it. It's too close. So I would put it away for a little while. And then I would get it back out and I would start reading it and I would edit along the way. So I think the best thing is that before you get anybody else involved, because when you start to get other people involved and you start to get a lot of other voices, that can really mess you up, especially if you're a person who is easily influenced by other people. It can really stick with you and make you doubt yourself. So I think the best thing you can do is get it to where you want it as much as you can. So definitely rereading it, editing it, learning how to self-edit before you get a crit partner or beta readers or anything like that, I think is going to be the most important next step.
Mm-hmm.
That makes sense?
Yeah, I agree 100%.
Yeah.
my other questions were mostly around marketing, because we already talked about how like the problem with marketing is it's so obscure and not all. If marketing worked the same way for everything, for every product, for everything that we sold out there, for every book, it would be a lot more straightforward, right? But the problem with marketing is that it's so obscure and it's so different for each person, right? So like what things have worked for you or haven't worked for you?
I think it's different for every person and every book and every genre. And I think this is one of the biggest frustrations, because if you could figure out what makes a book sell, then and bottle it, and sell that, I mean, you'd be a millionaire, because nobody, I think in a lot of ways we can do what we can, but it's really, really difficult to land on what works. And it's not always quantifiable. I mean, you don't always know. I think some of the best things so I think that one of the questions maybe coming up is mistakes you made. And I think one of the dumbest things I did was not start a newsletter list with my first 3 books. And those were, I don't know. I mean, I was moving, I was busy, whatever, but I didn't know. It was one of those things where you just don't know to get yourself out there. So having a really good website and having a mailing list is so critical, because like everybody always says, if Instagram or Facebook shut down tomorrow, you lose all of those people. And so you want to be able to stay in contact with the people that you've built relationships with, or the people that like what you're putting out. And the only way to really do that is through a newsletter list. So that would be something that I think is pretty effective. I mean, I think the other thing to know is it's slow. So like the best way I think to sell books is one reader at a time. And that means it's really slow. I mean, unless you're like Stephen King or, some of these people that are really, really big name authors who get that, huge marketing push from their publishing house, which is not very many people, then I think the only way you can really do it is by building relationships and continually putting out good product as much as you can, and trying to connect with people. That's hard. It's really hard.
Yeah. It is so hard. So what have you found to be like the most valuable way of getting your name out there?
Word of mouth, I think, is the best. I think the best thing, the best I guess return on investment, or whatever that I found, is just when you get readers talking about your book. Like I said, I kind of zeroed in on Instagram and Facebook. I know other writers that really love Twitter. I personally can't stand Twitter. It stresses me out so badly. I don't know why. I can't figure it out. It's just one of those things that I keep trying, and I'm like, this is just not for me. And no matter what I do, I get all the politics. So I'm like, unfollow. Wait, why am I still seeing all the politics? So I had to just cut all of that out. So I think the Bookstagram community on Instagram is another way that I think has been really effective, and they're very, influential, but they're just good people. So more than anything, it's just fun. So I think if you can find something that you enjoy that's fun and authentic, and that's more the way to go, I think.
Do you have any Bookstagrammers that you just love?
Oh my goodness, yeah, I do. One that comes to mind, I mean, I have a list. Oh my gosh, I know her real name, but now I need to find her Instagram handle. I say the wrong thing. It's the Book Lover Book Club, but it's like the _. I'm going to tell you this. Wait 1 second. No, I'm not doing it right. She's one of my favorite. The Book Lover Book Club, and it's the _book_lover. Like there's an underscore between each of those. She would definitely be one that comes to mind. There's the Caffeinated Reader, I really love. I mean, I know their real names, so it's hard for me to. Reading for the Weekend is another one that I love. I mean, there's so many, and I think just finding these beautiful pictures of books and being around people that champion books and reading is really, I think, one of the things that I love the most about Instagram. I think that's why I feel so at home there, because it's just like you can just so easily zero in on like, these are my people, you know?
I get that.
Yeah.
100%.
I want to know, like, what's the process of from like, so you've back, because it was your debut novel was A Sweet Summer Haven.
A Sweethaven Summer.
Okay, A Sweet Haven Summer. So after you finished that, and was that the first one? Is that how you got an agent?
That was my first. Yeah. Well, you want to know why I think I got an agent was because I used to work in the scrapbooking industry, and the scrapbooking was really big. I will tell you, I never wore a denim dress with Winnie the Pooh on it. There were all these like stereotypes about scrapbookers. I shouldn't be offended since I'm stereotyping men in this conversation, but it was a really big deal. I mean, scrapbooking was huge, and I loved it because number one, I got to tell my stories, and number two, I really liked taking pictures. And I wrote 2 books in the scrapbooking industry, and I wrote for a magazine. And I think because of that, there was a tie-in with scrapbooking in my Sweethaven stories, that connection I think really helped me. I think I sometimes wonder if I hadn't done that, if I would have gotten an agent, I would have gotten a contract. I honestly don't know.
So it's more that you already had your name out there, or more that like you had experience in scrapbooking and you were writing about
I
scrapbooking?
think more because I had a connection to another industry. I had my name out there. It was funny because when I first started pitching to agents, I remember the story that I wanted to pitch, the story that I wanted to write had nothing to do with scrapbooking. And I had 2 different agents the one that I ended up signing with, and then another agent that I talked to at a conference said, "Why aren't you writing about scrapbooking?" And I was like, oh, at that point, I've been doing it for so long. I was kind of, tired of it. And I was like, well, I'm just trying to do something different. And they were like, you should probably be doing the thing that you know. Like, you should probably doing the thing that you're the most, like, this is what you do. Like, you should do that. And I was like, oh, I mean, duh. So that was when I started to think about Sweethaven and think about, well, I mean, scrapbooking, I think there's an instant nostalgia that goes with it. And so then building a story around, these girls who traded a scrapbook, sort of like Sisterhood of the Traveling Pants, but it was a scrapbook. So that was the way they stayed in touch throughout the school year. And then in the summer, they would spend their summers together, and they would put the whole book together, and then they would send it around again throughout the next year. And of course, there was a falling out, and now they're all grown-ups. And one of their daughters wants to find out what happened and put them all back together. And that series was really fun to write. I mean, I loved so many things about it, but I really think it was because of the scrapbooking. Yeah.
So have you incorporated scrapbooking into your brand?
No, probably should have. I probably should have. I mean, really, I couldn't do both anymore. It got to the point where I couldn't keep. I mean, I scrapbook, like my scrapbooking time became my writing time. And so I couldn't figure out a way to do both. I really did it with that first series, but not beyond that. And I think scrapbooking has kind of changed too. I don't know much about the industry or how it is at this point, but it's one of those things that I sometimes think about revisiting. Number one, because I miss it. I mean, I have like all these scrapbooks up until when my youngest was like 2. And it all just kind of ends. But I also just, like I said, I love the reasons that I scrapbooked. I still love those reasons, and like leaving a legacy and letting people see a part of your life. Like, can you imagine after somebody, like if your grandparents have passed away, I mean, having their words written in their handwriting, I mean, there's something really special about that. So think about that a lot.
I love that.
Yeah.
That's cool.
Perfect. Okay, well, thank you again, Courtney, so much. Yeah. And so where's the best place for people to get your book? Is it Amazon for?
I think definitely all of them are on Amazon. Barnes & Noble has many of them. The website has links up. Okay. So yeah.
All of that. Okay.
And I mean, any local bookstore, I'm always a fan of supporting the local bookstore. I tried last year just to buy at my local bookstore as much as I could, just because, I mean, I love that place.
I mean, I know you don't want to go out as much, wear your mask, whatever, but yeah, I feel like, yeah, I'm sure bookstores are being hit hard with COVID, so it's like, yes, bookstores.
I think so. So as much as we can support them,
yeah,
for sure.
Yeah, we need them still.
We do.
Everyone check out her latest book, A Match Made at Christmas. I'm
getting it.
The perfect book Christmas, for the holidays. So
Happy love story.
and don't forget to like, comment, share, save
Yes.
This video so that you can support us and support Courtney for doing this.
And if you're a new writer, follow Courtney's Instagram because she's a great author to follow and kind of get some ideas of how you can grow your own social media platform.
Definitely trying to get more out there for because I mean, I have had so many people that have helped me along the way. I just want to be there to help other people answer questions. You know, no question is stupid. So I'm always up for that in my DMs and stuff. So
I'll remember that. I'm sure I'll have other questions after I get off the video.
Sure.
Oh, wait, I should have asked that.
Shoot them my way.
Well, you're the best, Courtney. I'm so glad that we got to like meet you and get to know you better on this phone call.
Yeah, thank you so much.
Thanks, guys.
All right, have a good weekend.
Okay, bye-bye.
Bye.